Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for tuning in. It's been requested to do a chiropractic basics review. So we're going to do a little bit of that tonight, and you guys here can help educate the people at home who don't know the basics, okay? So we'll start off with what's the master system of the body. So what system or all except organ controls and coordinates all the different parts of the body? Yes, the brain and nervous system, right? So your nervous system, that brain sends the message down the spinal cord, out those nerves to all the different parts of the body, telling your heart when to beat, your lungs when to breathe, your stomach when to digest. So there are efferent nerves. We're breaking the nervous system down into efferent, which is nerves coming from the brain to effect the parts of the body. So let's say the heart, okay? So there's several different efferent nerves that bring messages out to the heart. And of those, we break them down into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So it's like the brake and the gas. And one part of the nervous system that's sympathetic speeds things up or increases tone, and the parasympathetic slows things down or brings things, down, relaxes things more, okay? So of those effector nerves, those efferent nerves that bring messages from the brain to the body, you got the brake and the gas on at all times to a certain degree, okay? And when we have that, we have tone. Like you grab somebody's arm, when they're alive, they have tone there. When they're not alive and there's not that message being sent, what a letdown. Like it's not, there's no tone there, okay? So even the organs, like a heart, that's muscle, okay? So the heart has a certain tone just because it's muscle. But take like the liver, for example, isn't really a muscle. It's more of like a giant gland. So it secretes different hormones and enzymes and all these things to help us either digest food or fight, viruses and bugs. So there's still a tone to a degree there. It vibrates at a certain frequency. It has a certain tone. So that tone is determined by the nervous system. And if the brake and the gas are on at the right amount, then that's the right tone for that organ. But if there's a subluxation, if there's not enough, let's say, brake being applied, it's going to seem as if it's running wild, okay? And we might think, well, there's too much gas, there's too much. But in most cases, it's not that there's too much gas being applied, it's that there's not enough brake. So this is one of we talked about the Gonstead system and our tools that we use for analysis on how to figure out what we're going to adjust or what we're going to fix on a person. One of those tools is symptomatology. So if you understand what we're talking about here, looking at those effector nerves, those efferent nerves, the brake and the gas, if somebody has a heart rate that's way too high, do they have too much gas or more than likely too little brake? More than likely it's too little brake. So these parts of the nervous system that we're looking at here, we have those yellow nerves. Those are the sympathetic. Those are the gas, okay? And you do have gas nerves, sympathetic nerves run into the heart. They determine the strength of the heart, all right? And if you have somebody who has a weak heart, it'll get enlarged. If it's not beating hard enough, it'll get enlarged so that it can keep up with the volume, and that's called congestive heart failure, okay? So congestive heart failure, when we see that, we are usually looking at those gas nerves going to the heart, and if we adjust those, the heart's going to get stronger, okay? But this green nerve, it's green. If you're yellow, blue, yellow, red, green, colorblind, it might look blue, but it's that green nerve branches off the brain stem and comes down to the heart. That's called the vagus nerve. That's a pretty famous one. And it runs a couple different organs, but it's the brake to those organs. Okay, so when it goes to the heart, it's going to slow the heart rate down. All right, it's gonna calm down the heartbeat. All right, and even control the rhythm of the heart. So if the heart's running wild and it's skipping beats and it's just all over the place, chances are it's not that it's, again, too much gas. It's that there's not enough of that vagus nerve stimulation or input, and it's running too wild, okay? But the vagus nerve also goes to the lungs, controls the respiration or helps control the respiration. A branch goes to the stomach. It's actually responsible for down-regulating that acid production after a meal or at certain times of the day, okay? So one thing that we often ask is, like, if you have a symptom, what time of the day is it worse? Because we're looking at those two parts of the nervous system again. One is more active during later hours of the day, those parasympathetic ones that come from way high up. The brake usually has to be more active at the later hours of the day while we're getting ready to go to sleep. We don't want our heart racing. We don't want our stomach, churning and produce. We don't want to be breathing extra hard or extra fast. So the brake comes on more at night. All right, does that make sense? Okay, so all these different parts of the nervous system. There's those effector nerves, but there's also afferent nerves that bring a message from that organ then back to the brain. So if the heart's beating like crazy, okay, it's also sending that message back to the brain about what it's doing and how it's doing. And then the brain might send a message to the liver to release more, energy. All right, so that's kind of how the nervous system communicates. It's like a circuit. So we've got messages or electrical signals going out to the heart, but we've also got the other half of that circuit going back to the brain. Okay, that's kind of the power source. So those nerves are very important, because if those nerves aren't carrying that message, that electrical signal out to the heart, what happens to the heart? It's not going to beat, right? So how does our body protect those nerves and the nervous system? We've got what protecting our brain, our skull, and then what protects the spinal cord and the brain stem? It's the spine. Yeah. So those bones of the spine, there's 29 different bones of the spine, 24 in most people. There can be 29 if it's not fused. But anywho, there's all those bones of the spine, and they're there like kind of plate armor overlapping to protect those nerves. So according to Gray's Anatomy, the nervous system controls and coordinates all the organs and structures of the human body. So it's important, and that's why we have the spine there. And this is your general typical vertebrae. So we've got the body of that vertebrae up here, and those are the parts that stack on top of one another and support our weight. And then in between, we've got that disc. You guys have all heard of the slip disc, right? When that disc is damaged, it can extrude some of the center nucleus of that disc and hit a nerve root, and that's going to choke off that nerve message going out to the leg or wherever that nerve goes. But it's also then, because it's putting severe pressure on that nerve root at that point, it's affecting and sending back signals up to the brain about pain, that there's pressure on this nerve right here, and we feel pain in the leg, but where does the pain signal actually come from? It's in our brain, right? It's not here. So that's going to come in handy to know in a little bit here. But that's how we protect those nerves. The spinal cord is in here, in that spinal canal, so that right there, that little hole. The skull has a hole where the brain stem drops down, and then it gets smaller the lower we go in the spine. But that spinal canal there, the brain stem and the spinal cord hang loosely suspended by attachment points. Okay, So the brain and the spinal cord, there's a surrounding tissue called the meninges. And you've heard of meningitis. That's inflammation of the meninges, okay? So that surrounding tissue, that membrane that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord, and then there's fluid in it. So it's like the spinal cord is so delicate, the brain and spinal cord is so delicate, they're like suspended in fluid. And it's a hydraulic system. So if you have a nick in that meninges and you're losing fluid, it starts to actually affect the volume of the brain and the spinal cord. And that person will start having terrible symptoms, headaches and vomiting and, seizures and all sorts of bad stuff because they're losing that hydraulic support for the brain and the spinal cord, okay? So it's loosely suspended, like I said, by those attachments within that fluid, all right? So the best part about the spine is that it's movable. If we couldn't move the spine, like if this was all one solid column of bone instead of 24 different individual movable bones stacking on top of one another, we couldn't bend over, we couldn't twist, we couldn't turn, we couldn't look over our shoulder. None of that would be possible. So the disc allows that motion, but the best part of the spine is also the worst part of the spine. The fact that it's movable means things can move out of place on occasion. Now there's one animal in the animal kingdom, a vertebrate, which means it has a backbone, it has spinal vertebrae, that has its spine completely fused and protected by a shell, okay, a turtle. And if you think about what's the longest living animal on the planet, it's the Galapagos tortoise. They can be over 500 years old. And I think there might be something to that because the spine is completely protected and it's fused to the shell. So those bones actually can't be moved out of position. And in theory then, those messages are going to make it from that turtle's body out, or from the turtle's brain out to the turtle's body at 100%. Okay? You got 100% of those messages, those functional messages making it out to your heart's going to function at 100%. If you got 100% of those functional messages making it out to the lungs, your lungs are going to, and so on and so forth. So the best part is also the worst part. Movable parts. Movable parts move out of place sometimes. When that happens in the spine, what do we call that? A subluxation, yes. So subluxation, it's defined as a minor misalignment. It can be as small as 1 millimeter. A minor misalignment of the spine which compresses a nerve and decreases its function. Well, we've learned in recent time, because the attachments that we talked about, loosely suspended by those attachments along the spinal canal, if we have 1 millimeter of torque, it can actually put a hydraulic sticking point, let's say, in the flow of that cerebrospinal fluid that the spinal cord is suspended in. So it doesn't even have to put direct pressure on a nerve, okay, to be a subluxation. It can actually put tension on the cord. And nervous tissue is actually more susceptible to stretch than it is to direct pressure, okay? So if you stretch that cord, like we're supposed to have these normal curves in the spine, okay? That's normal. So if you think about, like, if I'm holding my head up here, and this bone is the top bone here, and then we've got this curve in my neck, I've got an attachment there, and I've got an attachment here, and here's the distance, okay, between those two attachments. What happens if I lose that curve or I reverse that curve? We lengthen the distance between those attachments, all right? Oftentimes doctors will get somebody in with severe headaches or arm pain, radiating down into the hands and fingers, and they'll do an MRI and they'll look at the spine to see there must be a herniated disc that's putting pressure on that nerve. Again, direct pressure on that nerve to cause such a symptom. 80% of the time now, they're finding it's not a herniated disc. It's actually that stretch of the spinal cord. And that's how we know now that the nervous system is more susceptible to stretch than it is to direct pressure, okay? So that's why chiropractors do x-rays and look at the curves and the alignment there, is because that doesn't have to have a herniated disc to put pressure on a nerve. It can put stretch and cause just as much trouble. So subluxation, Latin, okay, sub means less than, lux means life, light, or divine light. All right, so sub, less than, life. Ation means to be in a state of. So subluxation literally translates to be in a state of less than life or less than divine light. So that information coming from the brain, those life messages coming from the brain to the heart, for example, aren't getting there because there's a subluxation. There's a bone out of place putting pressure, excuse me, on that nerve affecting the heart. All right. Now, what's that going to do? Over time, is it going to get better or is it going to get worse? I want you to think about that. I also want you to think about, is it something that we're necessarily going to feel? What percent of the nervous system would you guess is sensory, meaning we can feel it? Okay, it doesn't have to be pain sensitive. Pressure, light, sharp, dull, pressure sensors, hot, cold, pain, those are all separate and distinct nerve fibers or receptors, all right? We have specific fibers for hot and cold. We have specific sensors for light touch or pressure. We have specific sensors for pain, okay? So as a whole, when we say sensory, what percent of the nervous system is sensory? It's 9%. So it's 9, you knew it. It's 9%. And of that 9%, around 1% are nociceptive fibers or receptors, which are the pain sensitive ones. So the point being, we can have stuff like this going on. Pain isn't always the first symptom. Sometimes it's something functional. So we can have that going on and not necessarily feel it, okay? It doesn't have to put pressure on a sensory nerve. That's only 9% of that nerve fiber, or I'm sorry, that nerve root as a whole, if we got a direct pressure type of subluxation, okay? So the reason I bring that up is because we can have these going on sometimes for extended periods of time and not know about it because it's not ringing the pain bell in our brain saying, hey, you got something going on here. It might be causing some, if we got a subluxation going out to your kidneys, there aren't pain sensitive nerves in the kidneys themselves. They're in the surrounding tissue of the kidneys. We could have the kidney getting, lower and lower in function over time and not really have pain, but eventually we're going to have some kind of sign or symptom. High blood pressure is actually a sign of a kidney not functioning well. But when we go to the doctor and they take our blood pressure, usually they say, okay, you got high blood pressure, here's a pill for your high blood pressure. Not, we should figure out what's causing that high blood pressure, okay? And then we should address that, because underlying cause, do they get better or do they get worse with time? They typically get worse with time, okay? So what do we call that when something gets worse over time or worse every generation? Degeneration, right? So every cell in the body turns over at a predetermined time. If it's a heart cell, blood cell, liver cell, those, it's about 90 days, okay? Some of the bone cells and those cartilage cells, they're a little slower, maybe 4 months, 6 months. Some cells turn over really quick, like the lining mucosa of the stomach. Like every 5 minutes, those cells are being sloughed off and turning over and being replaced, okay? So, I bring that up because, again, that generation is important. If we've got that subluxation and it's choking off circulation or blood flow or nerve flow to an organ or a gland, over time, when those old cells die off in that organ or gland, and then the next generation comes in, that next generation of cells is getting less nerve supply and less blood supply. So they degenerate. Every generation gets worse. It actually gets smaller. Those cells come in smaller, okay? And that's a problem in a disc, because as those discs get smaller, the holes for the nerves get smaller. The holes also, there's a blood vessel that comes out there, gets smaller. So it's not just choking off that nerve supply, it's choking off the blood supply as well. And then it's kind of a downward spiral. It's a cycle, negative cycle of degeneration where, okay, now those heart cells are damaged and they're actually lower in quality than the last generation. And every generation they're getting worse, okay? And initially when that happens in chiropractic, we call that dis-ease, dis-ease, meaning the body's not at ease. But the longer that goes on, the more likelihood that we're actually going to see a full-blown disease process, okay? So that's, in a nutshell, what those subluxations are doing. And that's why chiropractors used to check people for subluxation and then adjust that subluxation if it's there, because it'll turn that inflammation back on, it'll increase that blood flow, and then every time those cells turn over from that point, they're actually going to regenerate and get better, get stronger, get bigger, okay? So, subluxation, bad. Adjustment, good. The basics. What type of things do we need to look out for if we're saying, okay, yeah, I understand subluxation bad, okay? Nervous system functioning 100% good, but subluxation bad. What type of things do we need to look out for? If you've never heard of subluxation before and you're wondering, well, could I have a subluxation? Because you can't feel it, right? If it's early, could I have a subluxation? What type of things do you need to look out for? What type of things would cause a potential misalignment of one of those vertebrae in your spine? Anybody? Stress, okay? So stress is the right answer. We break stress down into 3 different types, all right? So can you help me out? Physical stress, all right? So car accidents, sports, sports, slips and falls. Here in Minnesota, man, I cannot tell you how bad that ice has been this year. Slips and falls. Okay, who falls more than anybody? It's not old people. It's kids, especially when they're first learning to do stairs or first learning to walk. The average child has 200 major falls before they're 5 years old, okay? So, a lot of the subluxations that we see as adults actually started when we were kids, okay? So that's physical stress in a nutshell. What's the other types of stress that we talk about that can cause subluxation? Chemical stress, because your body has a stress response, and it's usually contraction. So if I chemically overstimulate my pancreas, what's going to happen there is a contraction. That pancreas is going to contract, and all the nerves that go to the pancreas are going to feed that afferent message that the pancreas is under attack back to the spinal cord. And at that level of the spinal cord, there's a reflex arc. It doesn't actually go up to the brain. It actually just makes the decision right there to contract all those muscles in that vertebral area, okay? So that contraction is sometimes hard enough to fracture bone. A lot of times, it's just hard enough to pull something out of position, all right? Cause a subluxation. So it's like throwing the breaker switch, because if my pancreas, if I take in 1,000 grams of sugar, drinking a case of Mountain Dew or something, my pancreas is either going to burn out and I'm screwed, or your body kind of throws the breaker switch right there to shut it down, okay? And now you got that sugar floating around in your bloodstream. What's going to filter it out? My kidneys, I'm going to pee it out, okay? That's why diabetics, they'll have sugar in their urine, because their pancreas is shut down. It's not making that insulin to take that sugar from the bloodstream and shuttle it into a cell for storage, okay? So chemical stress. That's how that would cause subluxation. And then we have emotional stress. And that's usually a tension type, like we talked about the cord tension. It's usually the type of thing that's gonna, okay, I'm stressed, so I'm gonna walk around like this. I'm gonna change my posture. I'm gonna change my curvatures. I'm gonna probably add some tension to the cord and alter the flow of that spinal fluid, but also alter the flow of those messages being sent over the spinal cord and brainstem, okay? So, you can have nerve pressure without feeling it, right? You can have subluxation without feeling it. So how do we tell if we have a subluxation? We get checked. And that's what the talks are about. It's about teaching people the basics of how the body works, how the nervous system works, how the spine works, and then how a subluxation happens. Then we can make that decision, okay, there's a potential that I have a subluxation because I know I was just in a car wreck, or I fell down the stairs, or, you know, I have stress. And that's why we check people. And I don't tell people, you need a chiropractor because you need to get adjusted. I tell people you should probably get checked by a chiropractor. And most chiropractors don't check for subluxation. They do general manipulation like we talked about in the Gonstead system overview. But in the Gonstead system, and there's over 200 different techniques, and some of them are very specific. So there's at least, Jason, 3 other chiropractors in town that do good specific work that I even refer to that aren't Gonstead. And I tell people, okay, go get checked, because they're going to look at the nervous system. They're going to look at the function. They're going to look at the structure, the alignment. They're going to look at subluxation. If it's there, they know how to correct that. Okay. And we and they do that at no charge for the people who come in from a presentation like this. And we'll do the exam, the x-rays, and usually I do 2 adjustments for a person so that they can see, is this technique for me? Because it isn't for everybody. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I don't like manual adjusting. I want somebody with an activator. Well, I know the guy in town who does specific activator, the full protocol, you know, or I just have an upper cervical issue. I'm not comfortable with, you know, manipulation. Okay, I got just the person for you. So I'm not saying even get checked by us. If you're at home watching and you have an issue with manual adjustments, again, we do the Gonstead system, do a little research on it, but give us a call, and we also have the referrals for the other people, so we can find the chiropractor that's going to best fit you. Okay? So with that, the benefits of chiropractic. We talked about this last week. Because the nervous system controls everything in your body, including your immune system, we find that people under chiropractic care have a 200% better immune response, 50% fewer medical visits, and a lot less money spent on drugs and surgery. Okay? So that's why you should get checked. And with that, thank you guys for showing up. Thanks for helping. You guys got 100%, and thanks for tuning in, you guys. Have a great evening.